The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs. Ellipsis Labs is building a world where mainstream finance happens on-chain. Their first product, Phoenix, is a fully on-chain limit order book DEX on Solana doing hundreds of millions of dollars in volume. I know this team personally. It's one of the strongest in the space. If you're interested in working with a team that's here to stay, Ellipsis Labs is hiring engineers passionate about DeFi to join their team. You can find Ellipsis Labs on Twitter at ellipsis_labs or head to ellipsislabs.xyz to learn more and apply. Hey guys, I'm here today with Janus. Janus is somebody who is maybe one of the most well-versed at a high level on the developments in Bitcoin scaling right now. So I think he's a great guest to have on to give us like a wide overview. Janus, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, my name's Janus online. I essentially am a glorified blogger. I'm working on a project right now called Bitcoin Layers, and we are analyzing all of these new implementations of sidechains on Bitcoin right now, what people consider L2s, but are in fact just, I would say, very centralized sidechains. So working on that currently. Background, I used to run communications at the Electric Coin Company, which is the company that created Zcash. And that's where I got like interested in the idea of like rollups on Bitcoin. Potentially, I read the Validity Rollups paper by John Light and was like, okay, this is really cool. We can maybe do like a Zcash shielded style rollup on top of Bitcoin. That's dope. So that's when I started researching it. And as I got more into that, I took a job and was working with Espresso. Some people might be familiar with them. They're building this kind of like sequencing marketplace for rollups that are on Ethereum mainly, I would say. And yeah, so I got relatively well-versed in some of the infrastructure side of these things and started kind of diving into a lot of the tech related to these Bitcoin scaling protocols, and very quickly found out that a lot of the marketing claims were a bit maybe dishonest. So started researching them and kind of looking into the trust assumptions. And yeah, I'm building out a website right now that documents all of those things.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to start with something which I don't hear discussed very often. And this is why I want to get maybe some context from you, or like to the extent that you have like a bit of a historical background. Bitcoin has had various attempts at scaling in the past, right? Like we've seen stacks and rootstock, and there have been other applications. What is it, in your opinion, that has limited these alternative sidechains or scaling solutions? Like, why do you think these have never really captured a lot of product market fit?
Yeah, it's really interesting because like I've used rootstock a couple of times, and I thought like the user experience on it wasn't like necessarily terrible. I think the main thing is that a lot of it, I think, is just mind share, and I think a lot of people just kind of very much so like were attracted more towards Ethereum. And building on Ethereum at the L1 level, and then from there, like when they needed to have more like scalable solutions, they developed L2s, and that's where a lot of like the venture capital went into. And I felt like Bitcoin was just kind of left behind in that regard. But I think if you look at the recent interest in Bitcoin scaling solutions, I think a lot of it is down to the fact that a lot of these protocols, like more traditional protocols, rootstock, stacks, liquid, etc., do have very federated bridge programs. So their bridge programs are operated with respect to liquid and rootstock specifically, anywhere from like 11 to 15 entities that are essentially just managing some multi-sig, and they have some specialized hardware, and they do have some stronger like security properties. It's just not like a Gnosis safe with a bunch of MetaMask wallets, right? But like it is just a multi-sig that's securing all of the BTC that is minted on these sidechains. With Stacks specifically, they actually don't have currently an enshrined bridge between Stacks and Bitcoin. So the way that you can mint BTC on Stacks is via two very centralized companies. One of them actually just went through a phishing attack and had, I think, one of their DeFi protocols exploited. So there's like a massive risk there. So maybe that's potentially why, right? Like the bridge programs in traditional Bitcoin sidechains are just not as robust as what you can build potentially, one, natively in Ethereum, and then two, also with these rollups. I do think the security properties for rollups on Ethereum and L2s on Ethereum are a bit stronger than what's currently live on Bitcoin. but I guess the counter argument to that might be is that, well, BitGo is supplying a bunch of, WBTC on Ethereum. And I understand that, and I understand that's custodial nature, but I still think that might also point to just the overall there's more developer mindshare in Ethereum, and there's just more, there's been traditionally like more of a builder culture. And that's where a lot of the users were attracted to in like the 2021 bull market. So I think that's kind of why like a lot of these side chains traditionally haven't got as much market share, just because there was more interest in building these things on other platforms. And there was also resistance, right? Like there's a ton of, like in the Bitcoin community, there's always resistance to these like more like decentralized financial applications, traditionally, I think, as well.
Yeah. So now you've like spun up this website. And by the way, for context, for like maybe some of my crypto native users versus strictly Bitcoiners, would you like, I would call your website something sort of like L2 beat, but for Bitcoin rollups. Okay. Yeah. I didn't want to like, I don't know if you had like some, reservations about me defining it as that, but that's basically what it is, right? So like
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. It's quite good. Like I obviously looked at it and it's like quite nicely laid out. So yeah, that's effectively what you're building now, and that's why I think you have like a lot of like you have a good perspective on what's being built right now. So then I want to ask then, what are you seeing differently now that you can point at with some of these roll ups, some of these new projects, and say like, this is a different direction than say Rootstock or Stacks or Liquid?
Yeah, so there's a couple. I think like the historical context here is really important, right? So like a lot of this idea of building rollups or trustless side chains, I think was really introduced by Eric Wall. I think like I don't want to like completely misquote what the actual timing of everything was, but I saw like in 2021, 2020. Started seeing more on Twitter that like Eric and a few others adjacent to him were, tweeting about like ZK Sync, for example, and how easy it is to just send like WBTC on ZK Sync to another person. You don't have to like do an L1 transaction to enter like the L2, etc. So these roll up style scaling solutions were very intriguing to a number of people in the Bitcoin community. Through that, then there was a report that was funded by the Human Rights Foundation, and I also believe CMS Holdings and Starkware. They funded a report to someone named John Light, who wrote this like report on how to build essentially validity rollups, ZK rollups on top of Bitcoin. So like that was when this first started like getting introduced of like we can build these more trust minimized side chains. And in the report, it did mention that there might potentially need to be some changes to Bitcoin via softwork. So adding something like a recursive covenant or a ZK verifier into the L1 to build these solutions. And the report was kind of like presenting the argument to do that. So kind of fast forward, maybe I'd say a year, the Rollkit team from the Celestia ecosystem actually built a sovereign rollup using Bitcoin for data availability. And then a couple of other projects were like looking to do that as well. So like somewhere in the summer of last year, right, you had like 3 or 4 teams that were like, we're just going to build a sovereign rollup. We're going to have on Bitcoin, use it for DA, and we're going to have some federated bridge program, right? So like some multi-sig, very similar to the side chains, the traditional side chains. So what kind of changed everything, right, was like when people figured out a way to build more trust minimized bridging protocols and started introducing these concepts and ideas, people were like, oh man, we can actually build like these roll up style blockchains on Bitcoin. And that, I think, when people figured that was possible, and Citrea, which is the roll up getting built by Chainway, was kind of the first ones to announce that we're going to build this trust minimized bridge, this trust minimized ZK verifier, and we're going to use Bitcoin for data availability, right? That's when like this whole influx of capital came in to the space. And that's where everyone was like, I'm going to build basically like the next Citrea, or I'm going to build like a solution similar to that. And we're going to add this like trust minimized bridge program. We're going to use Bitcoin for DA. We're going to be a ZK roll up, whatever. And like this huge influx of like attention started just really going off in the space. And when you looked at a few teams were like pretty legit, right? You have like Citrea, you have Alpin, you have some teams that are going like another direction from like a go-to-market perspective, but are putting a lot of research into this area. And then you were like, okay, there's like 10 teams doing this, right? But then like it started being like 70, 80, 90, 100 different like L2s. And it was kind of like, oh man, like these things, like there's no way that people are building these things today. There's no way that any of these things are like in production as rollups on top of Bitcoin, because I don't even think anyone's done a sovereign rollup in production on Bitcoin yet. I think everything is still like in the testnet phase. So it was kind of like, looking at all these things and being like, oh my gosh, like what's going on? And that's when I started, like, a lot of people encouraged me to start like diving into these specific designs, and I started looking into like their documentation sites and looking, at like finding like their L1 contract was listed on Ethereum. So basically they're like an Ethereum rollup with some like multi-sig bridge that's like securing the Bitcoin that's deposited onto the chain. And that's kind of like the design that a lot of these teams are following. Happy like to dive into that more, but like the historical context there was like, there was like some research done on this. People figured out how to use Bitcoin for DA. And then this like explosion of just energy started when people were like, oh, we can build trust minimized bridges. So let's just like kind of put the cart before the horse, I guess, and build these side chains with like progressive decentralization roadmaps. So that's kind of like the current state of affairs, that most teams are just launching like L2s on Ethereum or launching L2s on some fork of Ethereum that they built themselves. And they're progressively decentralizing to have like a trust minimized bridge with Bitcoin and becoming something like a rollup or a Validium.
Yeah. So like on that note, what would you describe as sort of like the current landscape? You don't have, I mean, if you want to name names, you can name names, or if you don't, feel free not to. I don't want you to feel like you have to be nice to some projects and more critical of others. But like, how would you describe just like the general landscape, like what some teams are trying to do and like the different approaches right now?
So I would say there's like mainly, there's probably like I would say four different approaches, right? So you have one approach, which is we are going to essentially have like a side chain, and we're just going to build some more trust minimized bridge programs. So like Stacks is trying to do that with SBTC. Like I think, Rootstock is researching something called BitVMX, and they're just trying to figure out how to build like a more trust minimized bridge program than the current federation that they have in place. Then you have like the roll up teams that are essentially doing the same thing. Like they're essentially just a side chain, but they're trying to do it to where they have, Bitcoin as a data availability layer, and inheriting some security properties from that, and then building similarly just like a trust minimized bridge program to the roll up execution environment. And there's some differences in designs and there's debate on which one's better and which one's worse. But like those are like the two main, I would say, kind of focuses for a lot of teams. Then you have this like third camp that's like, we're going to build just straight up side chains. We're going to not call it an L2. We're not going to try to be a roll up. I would say that's something that like Mezzo's trying to do. Like they're just essentially building a Tendermint based side chain, and they're going to use TBTC as like the native like enshrined bridge for depositing Bitcoin onto the chain. And they're calling it an economic layer. So it's like we're going to build applications that allow users to like deposit BTC into some application and earn some yield on another token. So like that's another design. And then there's this fourth design that teams are trying to do, which is launching initially on Ethereum and then adding more Bitcoin native, I would say either I don't know whether to call it security or like a stronger connection to Bitcoin, whether it's via like a more trust minimized two-way peg, or it's doing something like adding some component of like merge mining. A lot of teams are trying to do that. So when you look at the current landscape, though, is that all the teams are saying they're in like the roll-up camp. So we're trying to build like a blockchain that uses Bitcoin for DA, that has like a trustless bridge. And then you like look into their docs, and they're launching, basically on Ethereum or another fork of Ethereum. And they're using something like maybe like Celestia for DA, or their own like data availability committee that they've selected. And a lot of them are launching with like forks of like the OP stack or Polygon CDK. And they're actually launching with Ethereum rollup as a service providers, or companies that have spun off and created like their own Bitcoin rollup as a service provider type solution. So I would say when you look at like these lists that have 70 to 80 to 90 different quote unquote L2s, like the majority of them are launching on another block, or are using another parent blockchain. They're using like an alternative data availability solution. They have a centralized sequencer. Most of them don't have, like, for the OP stack chains, they don't have fraud proofs in place. Like the Polygon CDK forks, I think, have a little bit better trust assumptions, but are still completely permissioned and upgradable. And yeah, and some of them might like do something like post a transaction hash to Bitcoin, but the majority of them don't have any relationship to Bitcoin from a security perspective whatsoever. Now, I don't think that's necessarily bad, right? Like if you launch and you say like, hey, we're going to build this like completely centralized chain and we're going to let you do cool stuff with Bitcoin or ordinals or whatever. Like a lot of users might want to do that, right? Like users use, like to buy coffee, I use a Fedimint wallet, which is essentially a completely custodial Lightning wallet. And I use that to like buy coffee with when I go to like Paralelní Polis or Prague or something, right? Or try to buy stuff online with Bitcoin, because custodial Lightning can be, non-custodial Lightning can be difficult. So I use custodial applications. I think the issue is sometimes though, when these chains are coming to market, they're trying to say that they're like these trustless solutions built on these like new research paradigms or whatever. And it's like, hey, like I understand that there might be this like goal of progressive decentralization, but like you have to dig pretty far to find the code, find the documentation sites. And a lot of people are like, yeah, we're building rollups on Bitcoin, but they're rollups on entirely different blockchains. So there are a couple of teams that are doing that and being completely honest. And like in public, I'm like actually like very supportive, and in private as well, very supportive of what they're doing, because like it's kind of cool and interesting. Like, can we abstract away all the complexity of putting BTC onto another blockchain and basically make it feel like an L2 when it's just like a centralized like sidechain on another chain, right? So I think it's an interesting approach. And if you can add the progressive decentralization over time, I think that's pretty cool as well. But most teams aren't like saying that. And I think when you raise a lot of money and you launch a token like immediately, and you've already had like I don't know what the right word is, but you've already made a ton of money basically on your token launch. Like, what's the incentive then to decentralize this thing? And what's the incentive to actually build a legitimate connection to Bitcoin when you already have like a bunch of TVL, you've already made a bunch of money? I don't really see long-term these things actually turning into anything like actual roll-ups over the long term.
Yeah. Okay. Let's compare this. Let's compare this to Ethereum right quick. Compare Bitcoin rollups to Ethereum. So, like, for example, and you can run with this, but like on Ethereum, we have a smart contract that acts as the bridge. There's most of these rollups, to my knowledge, are still controlled by multi-sigs on Ethereum. So just run with this and like just give some perspective as to like, okay, these are the different trust models, guarantees with what is being attempted on Bitcoin right now versus what the current rollup landscape on Ethereum looks like.
Yeah, so I would say like it follows completely. Like all of the rollups, all of these like side chains are upgradable by some like admin controlled multi-sig. So they follow a lot of like the same like security assumptions there. I think the difference though in the design is that the bridge is like maybe there's not much of a difference, right? Like if the bridge is just like the differences in Bitcoin, like you're basically running some federated multi-sig that's like controlling all of the BTC instead of a smart contract. But I guess if the smart contract's upgradable, right? Like if there's no exit window, then you might potentially have like a similar trust assumption. I think though the difference is with Bitcoin specifically is that these chains, like these are all like just multi-sig wallets controlled by like a centralized company versus like a bridge contract that might be upgradable by like an admin key or something. Right. I think, yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say one thing. Like, there is a way to enshrine the bridges such that they're not upgradable on Ethereum. The thing is, and I think Eric Wall pointed this out, if Ethereum forks, these chains that have maybe burned the admin keys, right? They have to effectively launch a new protocol. Like this is my understanding. So that's, yeah, I mean, like there is a way to, I mean, is that, first of all, is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. And I would say like when you look at something like Aztec, for example, like I don't think they want to like be in that position, right? So a lot of like the research that they're doing is also on like how can we create like a decentralized process to like upgrade the chain if we need to. So I think the difference maybe potentially then with like Ethereum versus Bitcoin is that theoretically you can create these ways for like very trust minimized decentralized L2s on Ethereum, where currently in Bitcoin, it's currently like you can do that today, but like in Bitcoin, it's very much so in like a research phase of like, how can we create a trust minimized bridge program? Like, how can we kind of create like a way to use Bitcoin for data availability in a secure manner? Like, how can we scale in these other ways? Like they're looking at Bitcoin DAs like, oh, that's actually really expensive, so we can't really use Bitcoin for DA. So we're already not even, we're relegating ourselves to not building rollups and relegating ourselves to only building things like Validiums or Optimiums. So it's a bit different in the sense that like everything on Bitcoin right now is very much in like a research phase, and there's no way to like construct these trust minimized, I would say, L2s. And people are getting very close to doing it. And I think actually one of the chains is going to be launching on testnet soon with a lot of these things in place. But additionally, like I think the bridge program, for example, is going to be a federation at the start, like or like just like a custodian. So I think these like long term visions of like more decentralized, trust minimized designs are still very very far out. Whereas on like Ethereum, you can theoretically do it today. And like I would say, like Aztec is like probably the furthest along in like researching how to do this, like in like the most decentralized, trust minimized way possible.
Yeah, I think Aztec, especially like given they're from what I see from Aztec, they like have pretty ideological like so I would say cypherpunk mentality, and so like given what they are trying to do, I also would not want to be liable for a multi-sig or upgrade keys with what they're trying to build. So, but that's kind of encouraging in a sense, right? Like, you know, they realize like this could be like quite powerful for privacy, and so like you don't really want to be you don't really want to be over there like having admin keys. um okay, so I wanted to ask you quickly, this is a bit of a non sequitur, but like one of the big problems, I say one of the big problems, this is maybe the one of the biggest problems, and also I think sometimes this is like not described so well. A lot of times people talk about lightning and this problem of like inbound liquidity. Basically with Bitcoin L2s, you can't really trustlessly receive Bitcoin on an L2. Like, is that basically true?
Yes, because like even with Lightning, you do have to like open a channel with a counterparty. So you have to initiate like an L1 transaction in order to be able to receive funds on the L2. So I think that's why like when I started doing, I have like another open source like website called bitcoinrollups.io. The reason I was like looking into that was like trying to figure out, you know, additionally a way around that problem, and potentially rollups being the solution, right? Like, cause I can spin up an Arbitrum wallet today and you can send me like some funds on Arbitrum without like having to do like this L1 transaction, right? So there currently, right, there's no way to there's no way to trustlessly or trust minimize like receive funds on an L2 today.
Then moving off of that, is there are rollups the only solution to this in your mind, or are there other L2s scaling solutions where we can get cheap, um, ideally private payments or transactions where we don't have to force a user to create an L1 transaction first?
So I think the problem is, right, like everything comes with like its limitations, right? So like a lot of the even the rollups, right, they might have the trust assumptions with the bridge program would be this, it's one event, right? So you have to trust one of the online parties to keep the bridge program secure. But even in a lot of the initial designs, those programs are going to be federated. So they're still going to be like one of 21 or one of 30 or whatever, like known parties, versus, you know, it being like an open operator set controlling this multi-sig, or open operator set controlling the bridge. So I would say like even in like I would say like the next 2 years, right? Like a lot of these solutions are still going to have a relatively high amount of trust assumptions. I think most users and in most cases might be just fine taking that on and using these things. In my opinion, though, like I don't see how that's any different really than a lot of like the custodial solutions that have been getting built over like the last couple of years. Like I mentioned, I use this thing called Fediment, and essentially what Fediment is just like a way to create like federated applications. So it's like me and my friends are gonna spin up a multi-sig, and we're gonna control all of the Bitcoin that we're using in this federation amongst like our local community, right? So we're all like transacting in this federation, we're all transacting with each other. And like 3 or 4 or 5 like local community leaders are like the ones that are like controlling the multi-sig with everybody's funds, right? I think the original design was like, oh, not everybody's going to want to have to deal with the pains of self-custody. So we're going to build like this community custody model, right? And the interesting thing about that is they've been honest about that for like the last like 3 to 4 to 5 years. And I think the problem is that maybe not 3 to 4 to 5, maybe 3 years. I don't think it's been around that long. Yeah, 3 years. The problem is that people took that and were like, oh, we're going to build these massive federations and we're going to have these like massive like payment pools to have better privacy, right? And stuff like that, because the applications that you can build in these things are a bit more expressive than what you can do on like the Bitcoin L1. So you can do things like private payments. You can build essentially like smart contract modules. Like you can build, I think I talked to them a couple of weeks ago. I think you can build like an EVM like execution environment in a Fediman module. But ultimately, what's happening there is that the Bitcoin is being custodied by this like multi-sig. But when I started thinking about it, I was like, I don't really see how that's any different than most of the solutions that are in production today. I think if you upgrade to that trust minimize like 1 of n trust assumption, I think that's a better trust assumption than a Fediman. And I think for larger scale, like higher volume, financial transactions that are just worth more money, that might be a better trust assumption for a lot of people. But if you're just like a normal person depositing like a couple $100 or $500 into something, I don't see how using one of these new L2s is really that much better than using like a federated application module. So those are like the main 2 things I spend a lot of my time on, just looking at these like new sidechains and also like kind of thinking about how Fediman or eCash can be used in a lot of these use cases outside of payments. I think a lot of other people are looking at other solutions. I just haven't spent as much as my time there. But like ultimately, right, like I think for most of the stuff that's getting built, there is like, you're still running into this trust assumption where you're trusting a group of people that's like operating the multi-sig that's like issuing deposits into the L2.
Thanks for listening to The Gwart Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
I sort of asked this before, but I kind of want, like, now having discussed a bit further, I want to like come back for a second. Do you think that the lack of product market fit, and I think there's some nuance to that discussion unto itself, like why Lightning took off versus why Liquid didn't, like these have kind of been hashed out before, but you look at Ethereum and a lot of these, like we were saying, a lot of these rollups have similar trust assumptions, upgradability, multi-sig, centralized sequencers, so on and so forth. Do you think that this is what is holding back Bitcoiners from using these things? Like, just your personal opinion. Like, is the federated model what is preventing Liquid from capturing product market fit? Or is it like the Bitcoin community doesn't care that much? Because like, as you know, the Bitcoin community in the past, like maybe 5 years has been, at least publicly, like on Twitter, I guess, been co-opted by kind of like this, buy L1 Bitcoin and send it to cold storage and don't touch it, right? Like fiat's inflating and this isn't. That's all you have to do. And now people are like, well, we want to use it, right? Like ordinals and so on and so forth. But I still wonder, like, do people really want to do all this stuff? Because or the people who do want to do that stuff, they just go to Ethereum.
Like this is where like the argument's kind of interesting, right? So I think there's 2 camps. Like I went to Bitcoin Asia, right? And there's like kind of 2 camps, right? You have like your traditional Bitcoin maximalist on Twitter that's like, that's kind of like just cold storage, store value over nothing and over everything. And they're not really interested in like actually like using Lightning self-custodially. That's why the adoption of like custodial solutions are so high, because they're like, oh, it's $50. Like, what do I care that I like lose $50 if I get rugs by the custodian, right? So I think most people that were like having this opinion of like, yeah, we don't really need to scale because ultimately the best use case is the store value and it's not peer-to-peer digital cash or whatever, right? Like that was kind of, there was no need to scale because the only way that they were using Bitcoin was like in this very, very minimal way of like sending tips to each other, like on Nostr or some shit, right? Like But then I look at like, all the crazy stuff that's happened with like, and I went to Bitcoin Asia, and this is like where it really hit me. Like a lot of people don't care that these are like multi-sigs, and they don't care that there's a lot of trust assumptions behind these like centralized chains, because it gives them the opportunity to like deposit like their Bitcoin into some like other side chain, one in hopes of like a token airdrop, right? So they're all going to deposit into like this bridge or whatever, or this multi-sig, and they get minted some like, or they get airdropped some token, and they make a bunch of money doing that. So that's cool, right? And then for like, because most of the people, like if you look at the actual transaction volume on these chains, like most people actually aren't using them. So I think that's the main use case, that people are just depositing funds into some multi-sig to like get some extra tokens and make some more money, and they're willing to take on that initial risk of like the bridge rugging them. So I think that's kind of like interesting to see that a lot of people are willing to take on that additional like trust, like they're willing to trust someone else if there's a lot of money to be made. But then additionally, right, like once these things do get built out more and are doing more volume and have like better UX and better like applications on them, like I think the interesting one is to kind of watch right now is like Bob. It's built on Bitcoin. It's Bob for short. They're essentially an Ethereum rollup built on the OP stack, and they're building a ton of applications specifically for like Bitcoin. And it's going to be really interesting to see how many people like move their money over to that chain and start like playing the financial casino games in order to get like airdrops from like these various dapps or whatever, right? So I think like you do have that one camp of like people that are like, we don't need to scale because the only reason like we would need to scale is to like buy our coffee. And for me, I'd rather just use a custodial application. But then you have this like utter degeneracy out, like the other side, which is like utter degeneracy. And they're like, no, we're going to play like financial speculative games on Bitcoin. We're using the L1 right now. It's pretty expensive. Let's build better L2s because we want to be able to transact as freely as possible. We want to play in the casinos. And I think there is a divide and a split right now. And it's going to be interesting to kind of see how that plays out like in the long term. But I don't think the traditional, as much as I might align with a lot of like the ideals, like the traditional store value maximalist is actually the primary demographic for the majority of Bitcoin holders. I think a lot of people just want to like play financial games to get more Bitcoin. Like I think there is a big market of people that want to do that out there. So there is kind of a product market fit. Like if you can issue a bunch of new shitcoins, right? Like there is a product market fit for these new sidechains then. So I think that's kind of how a lot of it will play out in the next little while.
That camp like was most vocal, and yeah, a lot of people have talked about this, but the reality is like they're probably a very, very small faction of the aggregate holders or users of Bitcoin. So, well, then on that note, what do you think are applications on these L2s? Like, let's just kind of put aside for a second, like how these L2s are built out. Like, what are applications that you see, maybe not in production yet, but that you'd really like to see for Bitcoin?
Yeah, I'm really boring. So like I used to work on Zcash, and I think that like if you've never done a Zcash transaction, like a shielded transaction with someone, like I would highly recommend doing it because it's really cool to just like send someone like $5 and then look at like the block explorer after you do it and have like all of the transaction information that you would see like on on something like Ethereum or Bitcoin just be like completely open for everyone to see. And then like just that simple image of Zcash just being like completely encrypted, completely private, I think is, or likewise Monero, right? I think is like a really cool experience. So for me, like the only kind of thing I really care about long term is having the ability to do those types of transactions. I'd actually be willing to like take on like more like that's like Fedimints are like that, right? Fedimints have like pretty strong privacy. eCash has like pretty strong privacy. Although you are trusting like a multi-sig or a custodian with your funds, like I feel like in like the L2 sense, right? Like I feel like having some type of like Zcash style L2 or using like or building like Railgun, which is a privacy app on Ethereum that's like live on a few different chains and it's live on Arbitrum. Like building that on one of these new like EVM compatible L2s, I think would be really cool. I think most people though are definitely looking at like just standard, DeFi applications and standard like token swap protocols and very, very just like the more like traditional stuff that you see like in Ethereum. I think that's like the main driver. And I think that's why everyone, which I think is interesting. It's like, I don't really know like a lot of the technicalities behind it, but like, it seems that there's this new movement in Ethereum that everyone's like, we don't need to build on the EVM at the like we can create new execution environments that have different trade-offs. And it's like, well, if Ethereum at the L2 level is moving away from building like specifically with the EVM, then why would we just take the EVM and port it to all these Bitcoin L2s? I think people are just doing that because it's easier to get to market. But it's like there are a lot of cool like execution environments and VMs out there, and it's like, why don't we try to like build? Like I know one team is trying to build like the SVM, like the Solana virtual machine, but like a lot of these teams are just like forking the EVM and bringing it over, and it's like that's cool, but like there's apparently seems to be a lot of issues with that, and a lot of teams are looking to do different stuff. But I think you're just going to see very much like you're going to see a lot of copies of like what you see like on Arbitrum and other stuff on Ethereum, which consequently like makes it really hard to like go to market and beat how are we convinced that just because it's built on Bitcoin that these L2s, like how are we convinced that the new EVM L2 on Bitcoin or roll up on Bitcoin is going to gain adoption and market share from Arbitrum or Optimism, right? Like, because we're not competing with like, if this is the problem with like, I think the Bitcoin L2 go to market, it's like, I don't think we're competing with each other. Like we're competing with all the stuff that's going on in Ethereum and Solana. So like if we just copy copy what they're doing over there and bring it over to Bitcoin, I really struggle figuring out how that's going to gain a lot of adoption long term. I think you have to like build some things a little bit different, and I don't know if porting over and using BTC as like the native asset is like the thing that's going to drive a bunch of users over to these things. I could be wrong. Like I could be very wrong. Maybe people value Bitcoin more. I've heard VCs say that like if you can do this on Bitcoin, we don't even need Ethereum. But like I think when push comes to shove, it's a lot to ask like all these users who are using these different chains just to come over to Bitcoin just because it's Bitcoin. Maybe the new financial games and financial opportunities for like airdrops and stuff is enticing for enough people. But that stuff is doing quite well on Ethereum and Solana. So I'm not sure how that alone is going to bring people over. I might be wrong, but when you look at the activity specifically on a lot of these new chains, like not many people are actually using them. And like the user experience is pretty poor. Fees are pretty high relative to like stuff on Ethereum. So maybe long term that shifts and that changes, but I'm struggling to see how that works out right now.
From what I can tell, a lot of the VCs, like the overarching theme is that this is a massive untapped market, right? Like, oh, we haven't done excessive amount of shitcoining on Bitcoin yet. So like that alone is the rationale. Now I'm speaking for too many people, but I think that is largely what I've observed is like, well, we haven't done this on Bitcoin yet, so surely we can do this on Bitcoin. And you did like screw all the trust assumptions, screw all that stuff. Like all we need is airdrops, right? Like that'll get users over.
But like I don't know why then like that might just be then why we just build like why not just okay so someone tweeted this and it's been on my mind for like months, and it's like if I was building a Bitcoin L2, I wouldn't build a Bitcoin rollup. I would build like some centralized rollup on another chain, and I would just abstract everything away and just make it like a Bitcoin application chain. So basically what Bob and all these other L2s are actually doing, right? So like, let's say you just are able to maintain like really low fees and you're able to have like a really good user experience, and it plugs into all of these plugs into MetaMask and all these other Bitcoin wallets that people are using. And you don't even need to inherit security from Bitcoin, right? Because ultimately what people want to do is just play the casino. And I kind of like, as much as I care about, privacy and censorship resistance, when I just think about it from like a go-to-market perspective, I sometimes struggle to see why building like a Bitcoin native rollup is going to attract like a lot of like users from other chains. Now, if you build it and you build it with like the use cases that like maybe like Bitcoin maxis have in mind, so like building like Bitcoin backed stable coins or private payments, and that's like you're not trying to like build for the casino, maybe then then you're just competing with like Lightning or something, and you're trying to get more Bitcoiners transacting on chain, like more traditional Bitcoiners. but I'm still just seeing like the majority of people that are transacting are either just playing degeneracy games on these like kind of sidechain L2s, or they're using ordinals and stuff, right? So it's like I just struggle to see why building something that inherits like the full security of Bitcoin with like trust minimized bridges is like I don't know if people actually care about that. But yeah, I'm still trying to work through that in my head. I think like that tweet's been with me for a while of like just build like a better layer of applications versus like building something that inherits security.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm probably in agreement with you. We'll see how it sort of plays out. What are your thoughts on these L2s having tokens? Like almost all the L2s on Ethereum either have tokens or will have tokens. And I'm not talking about application tokens. I'm talking about, L2 like ARB or OP. What are your thoughts on that for Bitcoin?
I think people are going to hate it, and it's going to be like on Twitter. A lot of people are going to like. There's just going to be like a shitstorm of like Bitcoin maximalists, like essentially calling it, I guess, an affinity scam or whatever. But I don't think a lot of these L2s, right? And I intentionally, because I do speak to a lot of them, I intentionally never ask because I don't want to know, and I don't do any angel investing myself, so I don't know any of the terms that any of these teams are launching with. But I don't see how you compete in a market where everyone's trying to build their own like application specific L2 on Ethereum, their own sovereign rollup on Celestia, or rollup on even Solana now, and you don't launch a token. Like, how are you going to raise money? Like, how are you going to convince VCs to come in and pour a bunch of money into your protocol when you're like, oh yeah, we're going to make everything off transaction fees, instead of like, oh no, like we're not, like, because if the market and the competition have like set the precedent that you need a token, and that's the way to incentivize investment, then I don't really see how these Bitcoin scaling protocols can avoid that. And I think that's just the nature of the game, right? Like, as much as we want to theorize over censorship resistance and trustlessness, like the name of the game that's forwarded innovation for so long is like build a protocol, launch a shitcoin, get funded, make someone who invested rich, and then eventually hope it works out long term. That's the name of the game for a lot of this stuff. So I feel like people just have got to accept that as a reality. There might be a couple that don't launch with tokens, right? There's always the exceptions, but I just think like the market has set a precedent in Ethereum, it's set a precedent in other ecosystems, and I just don't see how Bitcoin avoids that. And I think it also it points to like make the token useful, right? Like, let's just not launch these things as like governance tokens and these DAOs that aren't really decentralized and are just like three people controlling the majority of the supply and voting on everything, right? Like, let's actually, try to create potentially protocols that these things can be useful in versus just like launching a governance token, right? I think that's like a unique opportunity, right? Like, I think Bitcoin can look at a lot of the things that happen in other ecosystems and potentially learn how to do things differently, right? Like, can a protocol launch with like a decentralized sequencer that's like, or a decentralized like proof of coordination protocol that's like secured by its own token? Like, that's really interesting. Like, if you can provide like immediate utility for it, right? That's something I think that could be like pretty cool. But yeah, I don't see how you avoid it at this point.
I will partially push back on this. I think you're correct in the sense that like in these other ecosystems, the game theory of it, this is an overused term, but the game theory of it is that if you don't launch a token, somebody else will, and they're going to get the users because the users want the tokies. Like, this is, and it's fairly straightforward, and we've seen this play out. What I would say though is like Lightning doesn't have a token. I don't think Fedimint will have a token. There are ways. It's just that, like you said, in order to get funding, in order to build out like this type of thing, you like most of these teams will have tokens. But like, so then, I mean, this is a big like qualm of mine, I would say, just generally speaking, because go ahead.
Yeah, I want to interject there. Then if that's like the case, right? Like, so Fedimint is completely funded. I think the majority of the developers and teams like working on that specifically are funded by like grants, right? So like maybe then there's an opportunity And the people actually designing like all of the things that are going to make this possible, like the trust minimized bridging protocols and the ZK verifiers and whatever, they're all funded, I think, by grants and nonprofits as well. So like there's this interesting opportunity as well for these people like funding like these open source developers to be like, hey, can we build like a trust minimized sidechain that has like some more expressive execution environment, and can we not launch a token, like can we do this experiment to like compete with all of the other things that are getting funded in the space, right? So like I think there is an opportunity to build stuff without tokens, obviously, right? Like and just maybe just use like a centralized sequencer or whatever. But I think that when you look at the space though, like I just don't see, like when you look at the people who are participating in these rounds and looking at the teams and whatever, like I just don't see how it doesn't go any other way. But yeah, like totally agree. Like there are like Fediment's, like I don't think Fediment is going to launch a token, right? So
Right.
yeah, totally agree with that. Yeah.
No, I think you're spot on that. Like when I see the cap tables, like these teams are launching tokens. Like let's take a step back here. Like all these current, roll up L2s, whatever on Bitcoin, they're going to launch tokens. But I'm just putting forth this idea that like that, and largely in agreement with you. This is how we've chosen. This is the path we've chosen, not necessarily the path that is obligatory, right? And especially in open source software development. And like the reason I push back on this more maybe is because, for example, with a lot of Ethereum L2s, the rationale is, okay, well, we're gonna have a token either now or in the future because we need a way to decentralize the sequencer. Okay, here's the thing. Like we need to define what decentralization means if we're talking about decentralizing the sequencer in this way, because I don't think there is any indication that the amount of tokens aren't just going to consolidate to whoever can extract the most from controlling the sequencer or the governance of the sequencer. So it's not like you have this like wide, diverse set of nodes around the world that don't have like some incentive to extract a tremendous amount. Like I don't see why, if, for example, I'm not like picking on anybody here, but like let's say if Arbitrum, I think they already, I forget, they have a foundation, a DAO, blah blah blah. But like I don't see why, if Arbitrum doesn't become extremely successful in the future and generates a tremendous amount of money from their sequencer fees, that BlackRock wouldn't just buy 30% of the outstanding supply and now reaps the rewards. That's not like decentralization. That's just like that's a different terminology altogether. So like I guess what I mainly push back on is like, look, there's a difference between saying like you can get these tokens out into the hands of people, which tokens do functionally, versus decentralizing them, i.e., there's not one or a small number of actors that could affect, real change on the protocol.
Yeah, I think in practice I mostly agree with that, right? Like I think even if like again, like if for example, like we're just using the sequencer example here, is like if I'm building an L2 and I want to create enough, like, and I only care about decentralizing the sequencer because I don't want to be like in the eyes of the U.S. government a money transmitter, right? Like that's why I care. So it's like I want to decentralize the sequencer to a set of like 30 nodes or 35 nodes across like a number of different geographic locations, right? Like then again, like how much of the supply, like what are you requiring? Like how much of this, like how much of the supply are these nodes like required to hold to in order to like stake and be a part of the network, right? And like how much, like is it delegated proof of stake? And like are all the users just delegating all of their tokens to like these like the set of like relatively centralized operator set, right? Again, like defining decentralization is important, but I would also say that like that is a really unexplored design space, and like everyone in Ethereum is still like operating with a centralized sequencer. So it's like how can like it's going to be interesting to see when like all these other protocols launch in like the next couple of years, and how they perform, and what the user experience is when they have like over 100 200 operators, right? And like what are the design spaces that teams are going to follow. Because I do think like if like a lot of teams initially will just launch with like some federated sequencer network with like 20 nodes or something. But yeah, like that's something that I think is like something to like look out for as well in the future, and kind of see how people leverage their token and securing those protocols. And is it just like regulatory arbitrage, or are they actually trying to build like a decentralized network?
Yeah, and then the other thing, which is like I would say adjacent to the same topic, Do you think that I talked to Alex B about this a good bit, and he has some strong opinions on this. Obviously, he always has strong opinions, right? Like,
Yes, yes, I like that dude.
uh,
He's cool.
yeah, like definitely somebody who I think has like a very good vision for Bitcoin. So, but he and I have been talking about this, and like, I look at a lot of the L2s in Ethereum, and indeed, Vitalik has even tweeted about this recently, like creating interoperability. Do you think that rollups, as opposed to something like Lightning, do you think that rollups in the way they're being built out are more in the vein of trying to silo users into an ecosystem and kind of keep them there with a moat? And then what is your personal opinion as to whether or not this is in the spirit of open source, open protocol, open internet?
Okay, this is it. This is yeah. Alex's quote is what, like, we're just building financial services. Like, we're just building banks. Like, even if they're trust minimized, and even if we have a way to do like some form of unilateral exit, like the most of the things that are going to get built are just banks. That's I've heard him say that a lot. So I think the problem with rollups, right, is like, okay, when I first started researching this, I was like all big-eyed and bushy-tailed, and like I had my little open source website, and I was like, rollups are the future on Bitcoin. People thought I was freaking crazy, and I was like, this is cool. And I was like, I've always heard that quote. I think C-Node says it a lot from Celestia, and I've heard like people in Solana say this, like, let's just build one big rollup. Like, why do we need like 100 of these things? Let's just build one big rollup, make it, super performant, and be done. So I think what happens though is that it's not just the users, right? Like, I think you look at these stacks and they're all vying for this, like, maybe aside, as the Aztec people would kill me if I included them, this maybe aside from Aztec, but like everyone's trying to build this like super chain thesis. So we're going to build this stack, we're going to have a roll up, and then we're going to launch this plethora of like application specific chains that are all going to interoperate, and it's going to be like using one chain, but it's not one chain because everyone has their own chain, and we're all going to have a shared sequencer, and then somehow ZK is going to solve everything. Like, I see that a lot. And like, again, I've worked with like a lot of really talented cryptographers and ZK people, but like, I'm just like, when I just see that tweeted all the time of like, ZK solves this, and I'm like, how? Like, I don't know. Like, can you please explain it to me? So I get like this idea of like the rollups on Bitcoin are just following that same, and this is where I get a little bit frustrated, maybe, and I push back on some of the teams when I talk to them. It's like, we don't need to launch 20 different rollups with 20 different, shared sequencer protocols and like compete for new application chain ecosystems that are going to like try to like drive all the users towards them in some way or some form of fashion. So it's like, I kind of look at that and I'm like, that seems to be a bit of a mess in Ethereum. There seems to be a lot of, development that has to take place in order to solve that. And I just wonder, like, at what point do we not try to follow the same path there? Because I kind of see it going in the same direction of like, we're going to launch our L2, and then we're going to have like a plethora of like DA partners, and you can launch your own app chain and you can use any DA solution. And I'm just like, it exactly turns into what Ethereum's done. And I don't know, like, I don't know what the future of Ethereum is. I don't know if it's going to sort itself out and it's going to, be solved in the end. But it does look like a lot of complexity, and I feel like the incentives always push towards just building, again, centralized solutions. So why not just launch a couple of these things and just allow like a plethora of like centralized application chains or centralized apps or whatever on top of these things? I don't know why that can't be done. Why we just can't launch like one or two roll up stacks instead of like 50. I hope that makes sense. Like that's like me unloading, like spending some time in Ethereum of like unloading, like I don't see how it works out long term, how everyone gets their own chain, everyone, and this thing is just as interoperable and just as composable as what the Ethereum L1 used to be, or what it is, if you're willing to like pay the fees to use it.
Yeah, well, like, honestly, if you actually look at this, like, what's happening is like the L2s are becoming the L1s, and then the L2s, which are now the L1s, all want new L2s. So like everybody will be an L3 effectively. Like every application.
Where do we stop? Yeah, it's like, where do we stop? And like, that's the problem, I think. Like with again, and it's an experiment. Maybe it does work, right? Maybe you can build like some bridging, some like faster bridging protocols with like using ZK, and like you have shared sequencers that are able to do like atomic transactions, and maybe you do get this like interoperability problem solved, right? But like I think when you look at that and you see all of the engineering that's having to be done to solve these issues by having a plethora of chains, why not look at that from a Bitcoin perspective and look at it as like, oh, that's a competitive advantage for us because we can design our ecosystem in a different way and design it in a way that's not like trying to build a blockchain for everything. Like I don't think we need a blockchain for everything, and I see the way that the incentives are being played out right now is that all the teams are going to try to design like very similar ecosystems.
Yeah, talking about ZK, like I think that the vision for a lot of these teams long run is to have some type of ZK verifier on the L1. Does this solve scaling? Because like, proofs are still bound by the L1 block size, right? So like we can push this to its extreme and see that nodes on the L1 are having to take in all these proofs. And is this like, I guess what I'm asking is like, there's been a lot of what the smart people say are like massive unlocks with ZK tech, and even just like the past 5 years, let's call it. And I don't know that necessarily the Bitcoin community is like, all right, we're ready like to tack on like Gross 16 or something like this, right? But there's been an increase, obviously, in the interest. Eric has been a big ZK guy for a long time, and it's quite interesting, I think. But I also am just like, well, you're like the L1 still has to, even if we get like ZK verify, right? Like this could be, as Alex B calls it, like a subtle block size increase if nodes are now having to verify all these massive proofs. What are your thoughts?
So I'll keep it at a pretty high level because I'll get lost very quickly. But like I feel like the ZK verifier aspect isn't necessarily to solve scalability. Because I think when you look at using Bitcoin as like a DA layer, I think it becomes very expensive very quickly. So I feel like the ZK aspect of this is just to enable more trustless bridging protocols. So I feel like even like I was talking with someone about this like last week, and I even feel like with these like recursive governance proposals, like these bridge programs that are being presented, I still think there is like there is still some trust mechanism behind it that potentially a ZK verifier could solve. Like people have told me that. I haven't looked into it too deeply. So there is still this like, and when I watch the roll-up teams give presentations at various conferences, they all acknowledge that having something like OP Groth 16 verify would like make this much easier. So I feel like the ZK side of it is just to create just a more trust minimizer, trustless bridge program. And then I feel like a lot of these solutions will still end up using alternative data availability layers, right? I still feel that like the majority of people that transact on these Bitcoin L2s will end up transacting on something that is similar to like a Validium model versus using like a Validity rollup. So I still think you're going to see teams using like Celestia or Avail or NewBit or some other solution for data availability to decrease the cost on users. And I feel like I think that's where a lot of the pushback from people comes from. Like I know a few of the Bitcoin magazine people like push back on rollups because it's like, well, if you're not using Bitcoin for DA, you're not inheriting the full security of Bitcoin, and you're trusting another consensus mechanism to make the data available. So I feel like that is where the two sides kind of diverge on that. But yeah, I don't think it solves the scalability aspect, but I think a lot of teams are interested in it because it creates more just trust minimized protocols.
But then from like, I don't know, once again, now I'm trying to get your personal take as opposed to kind of like the party lines, if you will, for either side. But like, is then if we can't use Bitcoin for DA because it'll be so expensive, right? And then you can't like trustlessly replicate the state effectively, is that something worth forking Bitcoin for? Like, and I mean, this, of course, there's a lot of nuance, but I want to ask you then, like, should we be forking, some ZK verifier in if we're probably going to end up using some other DA layer?
That's a really good point, right? And like, what's like what DA layer are you using? Are you using Celestia, or are you using some like permission data availability committee? Like, what's the trust assumption there, right? So I think the biggest thing is like, for example, and I'm currently talking through this with a few people, but like, let's look at like a BitVM style like roll up, for example, where the bridge program and the verifier have this like one event trust assumption. So you can create a BitVM Validium type thing, and you can still have it be pretty trust minimized because, like let's say like in Optimimium, right, where you have the sequencer creates like the sequencer and the DA committee like collude and create some like malicious state transition to steal everybody's money, right? And then the verifiers in the BitVM program can't challenge it because they can't challenge the state transition because they don't have access to the data from the DA layer, right? So like that is a bad situation, and that potentially can like result in everybody's funds getting stolen. So you need to have like a really robust DA layer and a mechanism to detect when the DA is on it, when the data is being withheld, right? To avoid this type of attack. And I feel like in the Validium model, even with BitVM, where there's a one event trust assumption, the operator of the bridge program would still have to present a validity proof to process the withdrawal to steal everybody's money. And if there was like some mechanism in order to create that proof or whatever, right? And the operator then the verifiers can challenge it because they can read their like software will like read the proof and be like, oh, that's bad, that's wrong, let's challenge that. And then like you have like a security fallback there, right? I probably butchered that, but that's kind of like my understanding of like these BitVM, Validium type blockchains can still have a mechanism in the event that like the DA layer withholds the data and someone's trying to steal all the funds. There's still a mechanism to like challenge the withdrawal and make sure that doesn't happen, as long as one of the honest verifiers is online. So like, I don't really like, I learned because I was trying to disprove that. I was trying to say that like the BitVM Validium model is just an Optimimium, and then I was wrong. And I was like, okay, cool. That's not bad, right? Like if it's something like BitVM2 where all the verifier sets like permissionless and anybody can participate as a verifier, like that's a pretty good trust assumption. And I know people have opinions on the security and what's the word I'm looking for? Like how optimal BitVM style bridges are. But like, I still think from a trust assumption perspective, that's not a terrible model. And it's like, why would we need to fork Bitcoin to just improve the trust assumption like a little bit for that, for something that is also very unlikely to happen if you use like a pretty robust DA layer, right? So as long as you're not using like some centralized DA committee, and you have like a pretty open like operator set for the verifier role in this BitVM program, right? Like I feel that that's like a relatively decent trust assumption, and I don't see. Yeah, I'm again like I created originally like my first website was like we're going to create a community website that will show people why we should like potentially advocate for something like a ZK verifier when I knew very little about all this stuff, and like now the more I learn and the more I get into it, I'm like, yeah, I can kind of see like a lot of the points being made by a number of teams in the space. Like we can build things today, we can test them out, we can see how these things work long term. Like let's take a break and take a beat before we try to push for something like an Groth 16 verify. There are people that staunchly disagree with that point. I'm kind of more of like, let's see how it plays out. But additionally, then you have like a lot of the teams building these things would also acknowledge that some form of like covenant as well, like I think improves these like BitVM programs as well. So there's that whole debate and that argument as well. So yeah, but I would say like the ZK verifier stuff is like, let's see how this all plays out first over the next couple of years before we propose something like that, I guess.
Yeah. Have you looked into how CatVM works? I think I looked at their like storybook white paper thing, but I'd honestly rather just have text and not like the cartoons. But I know that they have a certain marketing method, and I like those guys, but it was kind of annoying to read. So have you actually looked into how this works and like what they're kind of pushing for?
No, I honestly haven't. No,
Okay.
but I have. Yeah, I haven't, and yeah, so maybe they would push back on everything I just said there, but with relation to like the specific program I mentioned for the bridge. But there was a really good article by Shinobi in Bitcoin Magazine that kind of outlines how this works, and even in that article, like this is where my mind goes to like I don't really understand how like Groth 16 verify really helps here, right? But like, because that's you also have to acknowledge, like with a lot of these things, I think there's like 30 or 40 people that actually know what's going on, and like a lot of us are just kind of speculating on how these things really work. So like I try not to have strong opinions. But even in that article, I think Shinobi mentioned specifically, and would be happy to like kind of hear the opinions of others on this, but like something like opgroth 16 verify or opck verify would actually improve the trust assumptions for something like a CatVM bridge. But then he told me on a panel, we did a panel like 2 weeks ago. He was on him and I were on a panel together at a conference 2 weeks ago. And he said that the Taproot Wizards team actually think there are workarounds around that. So I think they're going to be releasing some stuff potentially on some workarounds related to the problems there. But yeah, that's my limit that's the limit of my knowledge around CatVM.
Yeah, I think also this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before in terms of like what applications or use cases do we actually care to enable. And you probably are closer to me. And it's funny, like when it comes to Bitcoin, I'm more like, if we can get cheap private payments, like as trustless as possible, hopefully like fairly trustless, lightning level trustlessness, but without, the necessity to use the L1 for a transaction, like I honestly would be quite happy and would even say like, all right, what we can get product market fit with this. Like this is enough, right? Well, when I look at like Ethereum and stuff, I'm like, oh, you guys should add everything. Like keep yeeting stuff onto this. Like let's see what's fun, right? So I just have like a different view, and it's not necessarily like I troll a lot about Ethereum, obviously, but like a lot, it's kind of just like I look at it differently. But I wanted to ask, like, I think you and I seem to be more in line with like what we care about for Bitcoin, maybe like private payments, like that to me is like that's exciting. Um, some type of stable coin probably on an L2 would be great. I would personally like to keep that away from the L1. But my question is like, how much do you think that how we look at this makes a difference in terms of the solutions that we want? And like, so the reason I ask that is because like, would you say that we really need like full roll-ups for what you and I may care about? Whereas I talk to like some of the Alpine guys, right? Like really like smart guys. I think they have they seem to know what they're talking about, and they want like lending and a dex and the perp dex. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, okay, but maybe you need a roll up for this, right? You need like this statefulness, but are there solutions that may not require a full roll up that can just give us like these, you know, payments or like these simple use cases?
I mean, yeah, like there's like I feel like there are like proposals right out there right now to like potentially make things like Lightning better. I know like people are very interested in Arc, and that's another solution people have mentioned. But I like, so I think though, like there was an interesting comment at Pizza Day a couple weeks ago where someone was like, we don't need a blockchain for everything. So like if we don't need to build a blockchain for it, let's look at these other solutions. And that's kind of where my mind, like I keep shilling them, but it goes back to things like Fedimints where you can build like pretty robust multi-sigs, and maybe you build it in like an institutionalized way where you have like a distributed set of multi-sigs with like known parties, similar to how any of these like trust minimized bridge programs would work, right? Like they're going to be well-known entities that are operating the nodes because they have like reputational stake at risk. You build something like that, and like, I think you can build like expressive smart contract modules and these different types of like decentralized financial applications in that type of setting. So something like I'm founding a company right now, and we just recently closed an investment round, and something we're actually looking to fund is a Rust developer to build out like an EVM, like a very lightweight EVM style execution environment in Fedimint. And we want to like see like and kind of write a report on it and like equate the trust assumptions of what, like how large can you scale this multi-sig? How can you ensure the multi-sig is not going to rug you? Like what are the various security mechanisms behind that? And then we look at something as like a roll up or something like that and be like, these are like the differences, and this is why one might be better for the other, or one might be better for one thing than the other. So that's kind of how I think about it right now. But I just think that like I'm still very early in like my understanding of like how we could do these things without, like universal state machines and like without blockchains. So, yeah, I think that there are potentially ways to build these things. I think for stuff like payments, right? Like there are ways to potentially improve Lightning. And I think, there like obviously there's proposals out there that are built purpose built for that. But then I think also there's people working on things like, I know a lot of the BitVM guys are interested in building something called ZK coins, which is like a client-side validation protocol that's like very good for payments, and it leverages validity proofs. So there are like proposals for other things out there that exist that are specifically purpose-built for things like payments. So yeah, I wonder like, what's the construction like if you try to build like a Zcash style roll up, right? You likely have to do what Aztec is doing, and you have to build like decentralized sequencers and decentralized proof of coordination protocols and have like a decentralized like governance process in order if you need to upgrade the chain. And like this is like a very tough thing to build, and it takes a really long time. So like, is that for that specific use case like the best use of resources? Like I'm not entirely convinced right now. So yeah, looking at a few of those other solutions as well is something like I'm spending a lot more time on right now as I like dive more into this stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask you one last thing. MEV. Do you have concerns? Are you optimistic that we can shove all this at least to the L2? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was like interested in like, oh, could we do base sequencing? Like I wrote a blog post called Espresso on Bitcoin. I was like, oh, how could we like run Bitcoin rollups on Espresso? So I wrote like a blog post on it and how it might work. And then I started thinking like, oh, how can we have Bitcoin miners like do the sequencing of L2 transactions? And everyone quickly very told me like, that's a terrible idea. Never recommend that again. Like, and then there was like the Meevil post that came out. I think it's from Matt Corallo, I think is how you pronounce his name. Matt Corallo came out. So I started like following like him and David Soroy and the BitVM builders chat were like talking a lot about this. I think that you can potentially like, as long as you don't have like the L1 miners directly sequencing the transactions, right? Like there was a post, a Spaces as well, like on like more improved L2s. And as long as like the L2s are like managing their own centralized sequencers or having like their own federated or decentralized sequencer sets that aren't like directly, like you don't directly have like L1 miner participation in, I think you can mitigate against MEV. You can mitigate against MEV in that way. I have heard some pushbacks on like if you enable covenants, you can like there is like someone will figure out a way to like figure out how to Jeremy Rubin's the one who specifically mentioned this. It was on a Spaces recently, and I'm forgetting the example that he said, but like there are risks for people figuring out a way to like create global state on the L1 with like recursive covenants, right? And then like if you're able to do that, then you have the miners like participating in this MEV game. So I'm interested to see like a lot more reports that come out on that. I think, but related to the L2 stuff, right? Like I think the incentive is going to be to initially have the centralized sequencer because you can make money on sequencer fees. And then like, again, like what you said earlier, like how decentralized is decentralized. And as long as you don't have a mechanism to where like you have L1 miners like directly participating in the sequencing of transactions, I think you can, with these new L2 designs, like I don't think MEV is like a massive concern as it is like opposed to like some of the other solutions that have been presented in the past. So yeah, that would be my initial take. And yeah, if you thought like base sequencing was a good idea in Bitcoin, I would encourage, like I did, like talk to people who are very smart and they will tell you it's actually not. So yeah.
Yeah, I think like if you can keep the expressivity off the L1, and there's a lot of good arguments as to why we will probably do that, right? Like it's just not efficient, it's not fast. There's all like creating these pool contracts is like generally where MEV is generated, and that's not efficient on Bitcoin either. Like some of the ordinal stuff, right? Like people have suggested there was like a big push to like get people thinking about this, but in reality, like most of the MEV isn't like it's certainly not what's going on elsewhere. I don't think it's funny. Like the guy from Flashbots on Ethereum, I think Bert Miller, he was like he was talking about I think Suave, which is their kind of like sidecar, another blockchain as you can imagine that does sequencing. Like I think it's similar to Hotshot probably or whatever the Espresso one is called. He was like my goal is for every Bitcoin block to be ordered by something like Suave. I'm like, I don't know that first of all, I don't think this is a good idea. But second of all, I don't even really know how this works in practice. Like you would really need like this direct, like as you were saying, link with L1 miners to sequence transactions. And I just don't. Yeah, I remain very unconvinced that there's going to be a lot of like L1 DeFi or development, like, right? So like if we can jam it to the L2s, that seems already preferable. And then I take the stance, right? Like if the sequencer is centralized, but like you have unilateral exit, like, okay, maybe if we have a lot of these, and then there's some people who say like, we can create interoperability with Lightning. Once again, like a little bit hand wavy right now, but like you have the ability to exit to another chain if needed, then like I'm okay with just like let somebody run a box, and especially if it's private in some capacity, I'm like, who cares, right? So I don't know, but I know you work with Espresso, so like they were trying to do the opposite.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things here, right? Like I'm much more like personally interested and people at Espresso, I think, and other kind of like, I know some of the people from Astria, and I know some of the other people who have like worked on decentralized sequencer designs, and people have different opinions on what it's very useful for, right? Like you have the one crowd that's like, we're going to build like these like completely composable L2s that everyone can have like their own chain, and transacting between them is just going to be like transacting on a single chain because of X, Y, and Z, right? And sequencing is a part of that. I'm more of the mind of like, I care a lot about like censorship resistance. So having decentralized sequencers, like if I'm on an L2, I just want the assurance that my transaction is eventually going to be included in an L2 block. That's kind of how I have always looked at decentralized sequencing. So yeah, and I think the thing there is like, again, you run into the question of like, how decentralized does this need to be? And if I can create a way that like I have unilateral exit between like these different L2s and the L1, like even in Bitcoin today, right? You can create a mechanism, and I think Citrea is going to launch with this, is that you can't force your exit because you're still trusting like a multi-sig with your funds, basically. But you can include your transaction. You can do a forced inclusion transaction, and then instead of relying on the centralized sequencer, you can rely on like the operators of the multi-sig to like allow you to like to permit the withdrawal, right? So there is a way to, even though you're trusting like another kind of pseudo centralized operator set, there is a way to exit if you're being censored by the sequencer, as long as the bridge operators are honest. So it's like if you can create more robust bridge programs, then that's like, right, that's like a really good thing, and like you can still have somewhat of like a pseudo unilateral exit. And then people are also mentioning, like you said, ways to do this between L2s. I think that's a lot of the pushback that people have on rollups in Bitcoin. It's like a lot of the pushback that I hear is that people feel that the cost to unilaterally exit from these protocols is going to be so high one day that like this emphasis on that as the classification for an L2. Like I've gotten a lot of pushback on that by saying that unilateral exit is what makes it an L2. I think others have as well. I would still disagree, but I'm coming to the point where like, you need the L2 operator sets to at least be decentralized enough to ensure that people can like have their transactions included in like these worst case scenarios, right? So I would agree with some of the pushback that people have, like a lot of the sidechains teams have on like rollups currently, is that like, yeah, like, well, if the cost of unilateral exit's like $2,000, then right, like no one's going to do it, right? Very few people are going to have access to do that. So that's something that's currently also being debated right now in Bitcoin when they think about these L2 designs.
But this is the same on Ethereum, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
yeah. It's like this is the thing. It's like I think from my perspective, the coolest thing about L2s on Ethereum is that you can onboard directly. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't love the debit card to Coinbase to Base trail, and then being able to silo you in and monitor all of your financial activity. That doesn't like get me super excited, but the fact that you can buy Ethereum on Coinbase with your debit card and onboard directly to an L2, that's a big unlock. Like that is undeniably a big unlock, and that's something that Bitcoin you cannot do yet. But in terms of this unilateral exit thing, it's still always the cost to enforce an L1 transaction. It's not like Ethereum has done something unique in this capacity, right?
So, yeah, so that's like a really important point too, right? Is like what type of user experience are like, so for example, there's a lot of like advocacy efforts to onboard people into Lightning, and they want to use wallets like Phoenix, for example, where it's like self-custodial, but you're trusting like some liquidity service provider to help you like manage your channels and everything. So like it's essentially you're trusting like a centralized service, but you still retain like the control of your funds. So with these wallets, you still need to initiate an L1 transaction to like onboard into the wallet. So when fees are like ridiculously high, people like that are only trying, like I tried to like give my like buy a coworker a beer with Lightning, and to initiate like the deposit, it was like $30 transaction fee for like $50. So you can't do that, right? That's like, then that I just was like, okay, I'll just send you money on Venmo because this is ridiculous. And a lot of the pushback that people have with like the ordinal stuff is like, oh, well, you're spamming the chain and like you're making this ridiculously hard to use. And it's like, and this is where the argument comes in, and this is where I think is like the beauty of like the Taproot Wizards, like the game of 4D chess that they have going on. Well, they're like, oh well, if the fees are so high, what if we had these better L2s like rollups or Validiums where you could just onboard directly? Like you can just create your account, and I can send you, you know, like you could do it, and like you can do this on Arbitrum today. We can both create accounts on Railgun and send each other. I can send you like $10 of DAI. The fees are a little bit higher because it's like a privacy application. And I'll pay like a 20-cent fee, and I can send you $10. It's completely encrypted. It's within like a Zcash style shield pool. And it's like, yeah, that's the beauty of some of these systems. If you can build them and you can construct them in a way that's like decentralized and robust enough, then you can get these user experiences that enable these, in my opinion, better peer-to-peer transactions than a system like Lightning can. Now, is that scalable with like at the L2 level with Bitcoin? I mean, that's when you get into the debate of like, can we use Bitcoin for DA? Do we need to use like another DA solution? Then you get into the argument of, is it a real L2 or not? And then like you get into semantics again, but like there are systems that are being proposed that can provide like a better use case for that and can provide the experience that you're talking about that people have on Ethereum today, where you just onboard directly. Like, why would I onboard if I was gonna have my mom like buy some shit coins, like why would I onboard her like to the L1? I can just have her onboard to like Optimism or Arbitrum or something.
I said I was only had one last question, but like I wanted to get your thoughts on one other thing. How do you feel about stable coins just in general? And do you think we need like, CNode, he's big on decentralized stable coins. What do you think about stable coins in general? And like, is this a massive unlock that Bitcoin needs?
I am not in the camp. So here's the thing about stable coins, right? Like I personally don't like, if I'm going to buy like for example, I bought like a pretty cool movie that like a lot of people in Bitcoin like have seen, and it's pretty awesome. And it tells like this story of like the specific scenario and how this one person in this group of people like fought against the US government for the right to do something related to like free speech. And I was like, I don't really want to use my credit card to buy this. So like, and in that instance, I also didn't think like, oh, I want a stable coin. Like I just wanted something to transfer to the producer of that movie so I could buy it. I just cared about it being private. I cared about it not being able to be traced. So like, and if you use Bitcoin correctly and like you don't use KYC all the time, like you can have those properties, and you can also use things like Monero or Zcash. So like for me in that instance, like I'm okay with volatility because I value the things that I purchase with Bitcoin or Monero more as like things that I either don't want to buy with dollars, or like I'm engaging, like when you go to like Parallelly Polis or something, it's like you're opting out of the system, even if it's just for a few days, like you're opting out of the system for something that you feel is better and that you feel is like more aligned with your personal beliefs, right? So like I think that's really cool, but that is not what's going to drive millions and millions and millions of people to like, at least in the current state, like within the next X amount of time, to use Bitcoin. So when you look at stable coins, and even when you look at like, this is where it gets really interesting, even when you look at things like illicit finance and what a lot of people would deem to be criminal activity, a lot of the volume is shifting. If you read like reports from like Chainalysis or Elliptic or whatever, a lot of the volume in those markets is also, if it's not via like Monero or Bitcoin, it's shifting to stable coins, because a lot of people just prefer having access to the dollar. So like I played soccer in college, and a lot of my friends are from like Argentina, and like going down to Argentina, like you see an immediate need, like people want dollars, and a way to get dollars in Argentina in places like that is via stablecoins. So when you think about like this initiative that I don't particularly like to partake in, because I do sometimes feel it's a little bit like internet colonialism, but like in the sense of like we're gonna bank the unbanked. It's like, yeah, stablecoins are something that people really enjoy using and enjoy, and has found product market fit. So if you're able to construct on these L2s a way to minimize the trust in these, like, essentially what is like centralized banks, right? You're just using it like a pseudo CBDC when you're transacting with like USDC or Tether. Like, I don't really see like the global, like we've done it, we've fixed money. Like, you're just creating a more permissionless, sometimes non KYC way to use a bank, which is cool, but like, how long is that sustainable from a regulatory perspective? So like, if you create a better way to issue stable coins, like, yeah, I guess I see the fit. I see the product market fit for that. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners as well, like when you look at like a lot of the like when you see people like that go down to these places, like I think Peter McCormick, he's done a great job of like doing movies in a lot of these places about onboarding people into like crypto or Bitcoin, and like a lot of them want stable coins, and Bitcoiners don't like hearing that. They're like, you're just supplying like the fiat debt monster. And it's like, well, a couple of like 2 points to that. One, like again, it sounds a little bit like you're trying to tell people in specific situations what they should use. Like, that's great, like you can have an opinion, but if the market says stable coins are what people should use, then that's what the market says, right? And then the other thing is like, I don't know if I really want to live in a world where the US dollar collapses. Like, I don't know if like the all of the governments and all of the banks like completely go under and we live in this like free for all, like anarcho-capitalist world where we're all transacting with Bitcoin, but like all like order in society ceases to exist. It's like, I guess like you can kind of prepare for that. But in the same vein, like I don't know if building and designing a world for that is something that I necessarily want to live in as well. So I definitely like see the value in people like building these types of solutions, even though they're not something that I personally opt for. And the reason I don't personally opt for is because I live in places that have access to like pretty stable fiat currencies. So like I never really need to use stable coins, but people do. So yeah, build them.
I think an immediate collapse of the US dollar would be catastrophic, but I also don't think it's going to happen. Like, people say you don't want to live in that world, and I say I don't want to live in that world if it goes down like to zero, if it like pulls a Terra Luna. That would be like, yeah, that something very, very bad has happened. But I do think over time we gradually shift to a harder money. But these type of things take a while. That's much more like inspiring to me, right? Like small circular economies develop. People want to hold a harder currency versus fiat, and this is like a gradual adoption cycle, and you just have to have like a very long time horizon for that, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and that's like 100% agree. And I have like friends who aren't necessarily what you would call quote unquote like Bitcoiners, but they have completely like, they're doing that, right? They think the Fed is a scam and they think the US dollar is a scam. So they're opting out and they're transacting with, cryptocurrencies. And that's like a really cool thing. And like, if people have like the ability to do that, they're not harming anyone and not consistently advocating that people in different situations have to do the same, or they're like some status cuck, then like, that's totally cool. But like, I think, yeah, this call for like the immediate collapse of the US government and the US dollar is just like, I candidly think it's insane. And I don't think the people advocating for that, like, if you can't do 10 pull-ups, then I don't think you're really going to survive like in that world where the dollar like completely collapses, right? So like, let's play a longer play the long game here.
Yeah. Well, I think this has been a great conversation. Where can people find you? You have 2 websites, I think, and then also your Twitter and what you're working on.
Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter at Janus. So JANUSZG _. That's my Twitter. And then I have an open source website called bitcoinrollups.io. Just super basic website that essentially gives you the TLDR on how Bitcoin, on how rollups work and how they might work on Bitcoin. So if that's something like you're interested in, it also links to a bunch of great educational resources on how these things can be built, outside of like just the really like TLDR information that I wrote up. And then the other website I'm working on is this thing called Bitcoin Layers. You could essentially call it something similar to like L2 Beat, but for like Bitcoin sidechain implementation specifically. check that out at bitcoinlayers.org. And yeah, we basically do really quick write-ups on the trust assumptions related to all of these layer 2 protocols. And yeah, have a really strong team, like research team and research advisory board that's supporting us with that. So yeah, I think we've got a really good thing going there. So if you want to learn more about these side chains in particular, I would recommend checking out that website.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Cool. Thanks.